Welcome to Ironwood Whispers, your corner for stories that hit the heart and spark the imagination. Before we begin this unforgettable story, I want to know, where are you joining us from today? Are you tuning in from the heart of a busy city or the peace of a small town? Share where you are listening from in the comments below. And if you're ready for a story that will stir every emotion in you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Once upon a time, a billionaire believed his arranged marriage was nothing but a cage, until the moment his bride lifted her veil, and what he saw transformed his heart and his destiny forever. Mark Callis stood at the altar of the Coral Gables Presbyterian Church, his jaw clenched so tightly he could feel his teeth grinding. At 32, he commanded a global shipping empire that moved half the world's cargo across oceans. But here, in this flower-draped sanctuary, he felt like a prisoner awaiting sentencing. The arranged marriage had been his father's final manipulation before the old man's death 6 months ago, a merger disguised as matrimony, binding the Callis shipping fortune to the Evelyn family's port holdings across Southeast Asia. He'd never even seen a proper photo of his bride, just shadowy corporate headshots and distant paparazzi captures. The organ music swelled, and Mark forced his expression into something resembling calm as the heavy church doors opened. His bride appeared in the doorway, a figure shrouded in ivory silk and an elaborate veil that obscured her face entirely. Rose Evelyn. Even her name sounded like something from a Victorian business contract. She moved down the aisle with measured steps, her father's arm linked through hers like a chain. Mark's best friend and CFO, James, shifted nervously beside him. "Last chance to run," James whispered, but they both knew there was no escape. The merger documents were already signed, contingent only on the exchange of vows. Without this marriage, Callis Shipping would lose access to crucial Asian ports, and their competitors would devour them within a year. Rose felt the weight of 200 eyes upon her as she processed down the aisle, but none heavier than those of the man waiting at the altar. Through her thick veil, she could make out Mark Callis's imposing silhouette, broad shoulders in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, dark hair meticulously styled, stance rigid as a soldier's. Everything about him screamed control and resentment. She understood his anger, she felt it too. 28 years of freedom, of building her own life as a marine biologist, ended with her father's ultimatum: marry Mark Callis or watch the family's ports be sold off piecemeal to pay her father's hidden debts. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years studying creatures of the deep, only to be netted and displayed like a trophy fish. Her fingers trembled as she reached the altar, and her father placed her hand in Mark's with the solemnity of a business transaction. Mark's hand was warm and steady, but she could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a forge. The minister began the ceremony, his words washing over them like white noise. Rose kept her eyes fixed on their joined hands, noticing the calluses on Mark's palm, unexpected for a billionaire who supposedly never lifted anything heavier than a champagne flute. When the minister asked if anyone objected, the silence stretched so long that Rose wondered if Mark himself might speak up. But the moment passed, and they moved inexorably toward their fate. "You may now lift the veil and kiss your bride," the minister announced with hollow cheer. Rose held her breath as Mark's hands rose to the elaborate French lace her stepmother had insisted upon. Time seemed to slow as he lifted the delicate fabric, revealing her face inch by inch. She heard his sharp intake of breath and finally raised her eyes to meet his. The man staring back at her wasn't the cold corporate shark she'd imagined. Mark Callis had eyes the color of storm-tossed seas, and in them she saw not anger but stunned recognition. They had met before, not in boardrooms or at galas, but in the most unlikely of places. Mark's world tilted on its axis as the veil fell away. The woman standing before him wasn't the severe, calculating heiress he'd constructed in his mind. Rose Evelyn was the marine research diver who'd saved his life 3 years ago in the Maldives, when a recreational dive had gone catastrophically wrong. He'd been exploring a reef alone, against all protocols, when his equipment malfunctioned 40 feet underwater. She'd appeared like a mermaid from the blue depths, sharing her air as she guided him to the surface. They'd spent one perfect day together afterward, talking about everything except their last names or real lives. She'd disappeared the next morning, leaving only a note. Some fish aren't meant to be caught. Rose watched the recognition dawn in Mark's eyes and felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. "Marcus?" she whispered, using the fake name he'd given her that day. The congregation rustled with confusion at the delay, but she couldn't look away from him. 3 years she'd carried the memory of the charming stranger who'd made her laugh until her sides hurt, who'd listened to her talk about ocean conservation with genuine interest, who'd kissed her under a canopy of stars and made her believe in fairy tales for exactly one night. Finding out he was Mark Callis, shipping magnate and environmental enemy #1 in ocean conservation circles, was like discovering Prince Charming ran a dragon-poaching empire. "I believe you're supposed to kiss now," the minister prompted, clearly flustered by the frozen tableau before him. Mark's hand cupped Rose's face with unexpected gentleness, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Hello, Rosie," he murmured, using the nickname only he had ever called her. Then his lips were on hers, and 3 years of separation evaporated like morning mist. The kiss was supposed to be perfunctory, a seal on a business deal. Instead, it was fire and memory, and the dangerous spark of possibility. When they finally parted, the congregation erupted in applause, mistaking their chemistry for theatrical romance rather than the collision of past and present it truly was. The reception at the Breakers Hotel was a blur of congratulations and champagne toasts. Rose and Mark moved through the festivities like actors in a play, smiling and nodding while their minds raced with the impossibility of their situation. During their first dance, Mark held her closer than propriety dictated. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" he asked against her ear. "Why didn't you?" she countered, her fingers tightening on his shoulder. "That day meant everything to me." His admission hung between them, like a challenged invitation. Around them, 500 guests celebrated a union that had just become infinitely more complicated than a mere business arrangement. James cornered Mark during a brief respite between courses. "Okay, what the hell was that at the altar? You looked like you'd seen a ghost." Mark knocked back his whiskey in one burning swallow. "Remember the girl from the Maldives, the one I couldn't find afterward?" James's eyes widened comically. "No, no way. Your arranged bride is your lost mermaid?" The nickname made Mark wince. He'd been so pathetic afterward, hiring private investigators to find a woman he knew only as Rosie, the marine biologist. "The universe has a sick sense of humor," Mark muttered. "Or maybe it's just my father, pulling strings from beyond the grave." Rose escaped to the ladies' lounge, where she found temporary sanctuary from the overwhelming revelations. Her cousin Patricia found her there, touching up makeup she didn't need to touch up. "You look shocked," Patricia observed. "Isn't he what you expected?" Rose laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "He's exactly what I didn't expect." How could she explain that her new husband was both the man of her dreams and her professional nightmare? His shipping routes disrupted migration patterns. His cargo vessels contributed to noise pollution that confused whales. She'd written scathing papers about companies like his. And yet she'd never forgotten the way he'd held her hand on that beach, pointing out constellations while she corrected his mythology. The honeymoon suite at the breakers awaited them like an ornate trap. Rose stood frozen by the windows overlooking the Atlantic, still in her wedding gown, while Mark loosened his bow tie with jerky movements. "We need to talk," they said simultaneously, then shared an awkward laugh. "You first," Mark offered, pouring himself a scotch from the suite's bar. Rose turned to face him fully. "That day in the Maldives, I was there researching the impact of shipping lanes on coral spawning. You were, technically, the enemy." Mark's smile was rueful. "And I was there, scouting new routes through those exact reefs. We were Romeo and Juliet without even knowing it. Why did you leave?" Mark asked the question that had haunted him for 3 years. Rose moved to the bar, pouring her own drink with hands that trembled slightly. "My boat captain recognized you from a business magazine. Told me who you really were. I couldn't reconcile the man I'd spent the day with against Mark Callis, destroyer of oceans." The whiskey burned, but not as much as her confession. "I was a coward. I ran because I was already half in love with you, and I couldn't bear to watch you turn into someone else once we exchanged real names." Mark crossed the space between them in 3 strides, taking her glass and setting it aside. "I never turned into someone else," he said urgently. "I've been looking for you for 3 years. I've been comparing every woman I meet to a memory. Do you have any idea what that's been like?" His hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I changed 17 shipping routes because they went through protected waters. I invested millions in cleaner fuel technology. I created an entire environmental division that my board thinks is insane. All because a mermaid lectured me about ocean conservation for 8 hours straight." "You did?" Rose's voice came out breathless. She'd heard rumors of Callis Shipping's unexpected environmental initiatives, but had dismissed them as greenwashing. "My father had apoplexy. Said I was destroying his legacy for a woman I'd never find again." Mark's laugh was bitter. "The irony is perfect, isn't it? He arranged this marriage to punish me for going soft, never knowing he was giving me the exact thing I wanted most." His thumbs stroked her cheekbones. "The question is, what do we do now? We're married, but you hate everything I represent. We have one perfect day between us, and a lifetime of opposing interests ahead." Rose reached up to cover his hands with hers. "I don't hate you," she admitted. "I hate what your industry does to the oceans. But you, God help me. I've measured every man against you for 3 years too. Do you know how insufferable marine biologists are to date? They're either condescending about my research or completely disinterested. You listened to me ramble about plankton migration for 2 hours and actually asked follow-up questions." She pulled his hands down but didn't let go. "Maybe this doesn't have to be a prison. Maybe it can be a partnership. You have the power to change things, Mark. Real, substantial change. And I have the knowledge to help you do it right." "You'd do that?" Mark studied her face, searching for deception and finding only earnest determination. "You'd help me transform one of the world's largest shipping companies?" Rose squeezed his hands. "I'd help the man who quoted Shakespeare while teaching me to scuba dive in shallower waters. I'd help the man who gave his dessert to that stray dog on the beach. I'd help Marcus, if he's still in there somewhere, under all that corporate armor." Mark pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "He's still here," he murmured. "He's been waiting for Rosie to come back and save him from turning into his father." They stood there for long moments, holding each other, while the Atlantic crashed against the shore below. Finally, Rose pulled back enough to look at him. "We should probably establish some ground rules. This is a business arrangement that happens to have history. We can't just fall into bed because we have chemistry." Mark's smile was wicked. "Can't we?" But he stepped back, respecting her boundaries. You're right. We're essentially strangers who happen to be married. So what do you propose? Rose moved toward the bedroom. Separate sides of the bed, getting to know each other again. Really know each other this time. No lies, no hidden identities. And you take me to your next board meeting so I can explain why your Brazilian route is destroying a critical breeding ground. Deal, Mark agreed, following her. But I have conditions too. You give my business a chance. Visit the operations. Meet the people who depend on callous shipping for their livelihoods. Not everything is black and white, Rosie. Sometimes the enemy of the environment is just trying to feed families and keep global commerce moving. Rose paused in the doorway, her wedding dress catching the light. Fair enough, but you have to attend my next research presentation. The one where I show graphic images of what propeller strikes do to manatees. Mark winced. You fight dirty? You have no idea, Rose promised, disappearing into the bedroom to change. The first week of marriage was a careful dance of boundaries and revelations. They shared the penthouse apartment overlooking Biscayne Bay, establishing routines that maintained distance while allowing for intersection. Mark left for the office before dawn, but always left fresh coffee and a note with some memory from their day in the Maldives. Rose spent her days at the Marine Research Facility, coming home to find Mark reading her published papers with a furrowed brow and a highlighter. Their dinners became negotiation sessions disguised as conversation, each trying to convert the other to their perspective. This paper on sonic interference, Mark said one evening, gesturing with his fork. You're saying our engines are essentially deafening whales? Rose nodded, stealing a piece of his steak. Imagine trying to find your family in a crowd, while someone blasts an air horn in your ear constantly. That's what whales experience in shipping lanes. Mark pushed his plate toward her, having noticed she always finished her food and eyed his. So what's the solution? We can't just stop shipping. The global economy would collapse. Rose brightened. Actually, there's new technology that significantly reduces engine noise. It's expensive, but... Send me the specifications, Mark interrupted. I'll have the engineering team review it. Their first public appearance as a married couple was at a shipping industry gala in Miami. Rose wore an ocean blue gown that made Mark's breath catch when she emerged from her dressing room. Too much? She asked, smoothing the silk nervously. Perfect, he assured her, offering his arm. Though you might want to know that several of the attendees tonight were personally offended by your paper on ballast water contamination. Rose's smile was sharp. Good. Maybe they'll actually listen when I explained it in person. Mark found himself looking forward to watching his environmentalist wife take on a room full of shipping executives. The gala was held at the Vizcaya Museum, its European elegance a stark contrast to the industrial fortunes represented by the guests. Mark kept Rose close as they navigated the crowds, his hand protective on her lower back. "That's Harrison Mitchell," he murmured, indicating a red-faced man by the bar. "He owns the second-largest tanker fleet in the world and thinks climate change is a hoax." Rose's smile never wavered. "Introduce us." "I love a challenge." Mark bit back a grin. His father had arranged this marriage to bring him to heel, to chain him to tradition and profit. Instead, he'd inadvertently given Mark a secret weapon wrapped in silk and scientific credentials. "Harrison," Mark called out, guiding Rose toward the lion's den. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Dr. Rose Callis." She'd kept her maiden name professionally, but hearing his surname attached to hers still sent an unexpected thrill through him. Harrison's eyes dismissed, rose the moment he categorized her as a trophy wife. "Charming," he said perfunctorily, before turning back to Mark. "Now, about those Panama Canal fees." "Actually," Rose interjected smoothly, I've been studying the canal's new environmental surcharges. They're based on my colleagues' research into invasive species transport. Fascinating how zebra mussels alone cost the shipping industry $40 million annually in hull cleaning. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in academic warfare. Rose deployed facts like precision missiles, each one targeted to Harrison's profit margins. By the time she finished explaining how environmental compliance could actually save money long-term, the older man was looking at her with newfound respect and barely concealed alarm. "Your wife is quite knowledgeable," Harrison said weakly to Mark. "She's brilliant," Mark agreed, not bothering to hide his pride. "Also terrifying when you're on the wrong side of an argument." As they walked away, Rose slipped her hand into his. "Thank you for not undermining me," Mark squeezed gently. "Thank you for not eviscerating him entirely. I do still need to do business with the man." The drive home was charged with a new energy. "You were magnificent," Mark said, glancing at her as they waited at a red light. "Harrison's been dismissing environmental concerns for 30 years. And you had him taking notes." Rose kicked off her heels with a sigh of relief. "He's not stupid, just willfully ignorant. There's a difference. Show a smart businessman how environmental protection equals profit protection, and they'll listen." She paused, then added softly, "You listened. Even 3 years ago, when you had no reason to." Mark reached over to take her hand. "I had every reason to. You were passionate and brilliant and right. Also, you looked incredible in that wetsuit." "Smooth talker," Rose accused, but she didn't pull her hand away. The chemistry between them had been simmering all week, carefully controlled but impossible to ignore. Now, with the successful evening behind them and the city lights blurring past, the air in the car felt electric. "Mark," she said warningly when he lifted her hand to his lips. "We agreed to take things slow. We agreed to get to know each other," he corrected, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I know you take your coffee with an obscene amount of sugar. I know you hum when you're concentrating. I know you steal food off my plate because you have abandonment issues with good meals. How much more do I need to know?" Rose's breath caught as he kissed the inside of her wrist. "You know facts. You don't know. We don't know if we can make this work long-term. What happens when your board pushes back on environmental initiatives? What happens when my research directly contradicts your business interests? What happens when the fairy tale day in the Maldives can't stand up to real life?" Mark pulled into their building's garage and turned to face her fully. "Then we figure it out together. That's what partnerships do. Rose, I'm not asking you to give up your work or compromise your values. I'm asking you to help me be better, do better, and maybe, eventually, to let me love you the way I've wanted to, since you saved my life." The elevator ride to their penthouse was silent, but weighted with possibility. Rose watched their reflection in the mirrored walls, Mark in his tuxedo, her in her gown, looking like a couple from a magazine spread. But she knew the reality underneath, the calluses on his hands from actually working on ships in his youth, the scar on her shoulder from a research dive gone wrong, the complicated histories and conflicting goals that made their arranged marriage more minefield than merger. When the doors opened, she made a decision. "One dance," she said. "We didn't really get to dance at our wedding. Too many people watching." Mark's smile was slow and dangerous. "One dance," he agreed. He put on music, not the classical pieces from their reception, but something slower, sultrier. Rose stepped into his arms, and they swayed together in their living room, the lights of Miami spread out below them like scattered diamonds. "I was terrified that day," Mark murmured into her hair. "Not of dying without ever knowing your full name, without getting to tell you that you'd changed something fundamental in me." Rose pressed closer, her resolve weakening. "Mark, I know, he said, slow. But can I at least tell you that you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen? That your mind amazes me? That watching you destroy Harrison Mitchell might be the highlight of my year. Rose pulled back to look at him, finding his Stormsea eyes dark with desire, but also something deeper. This is dangerous, she whispered. I'm supposed to be the scientist here, the one who makes rational decisions. But when you look at me like that— Like what? Like I'm your whole ocean, she admitted. Like you'd change your entire world just to swim in my waters. Mark's hands tightened on her waist. I would. I am. Board meetings next Tuesday. You're presenting on the Brazilian route alternatives. I've already told them to clear 2 hours and come with open minds or face termination. Rose blinked. You're serious. Dead serious. You want to save the oceans? I'll give you a fleet to do it with. The kiss that followed was 3 years of longing condensed into a single moment. Rose's careful control shattered as Mark's mouth claimed hers, his hands tangling in her professionally styled hair. She gave as good as she got, nipping at his lower lip and pressing against him until they were both breathless. Rose, he groaned when she pulled back. This isn't slow, she panted, her lipstick thoroughly destroyed. I know, I don't care, do you? Mark's answer was to sweep her up into his arms, carrying her toward his bedroom. Mark? Our bedroom, he corrected. You've been sleeping in the guest room for a week. Enough. We're married. We have history. We have chemistry that could power the eastern seaboard. Stop overthinking. But Rose was already overthinking, even as she let him carry her. Put me down, she said quietly. Mark immediately complied, setting her gently on her feet in the hallway. Too fast? He asked, his hands hovering like he wanted to touch her, but wasn't sure he was allowed. Rose straightened her gown, trying to rebuild her walls. I need to trust you first. Really trust you. Not just with my body, but with my work, my values, everything I am. Can you understand that? Mark's expression softened. Of course I understand. You're not just some woman I'm attracted to, Rose. You're my wife, my conscience, my chance at being better than my father. Take all the time you need. She stood on her toes to kiss his cheek. Thank you. For understanding. For the dance. For defending me tonight. Always, Mark promised. Now go to bed. Your bed. We have that early meeting with the Port Authority tomorrow. Rose nodded and walked toward the guest room, feeling his eyes on her the entire way. At her door, she turned back. Mark. That day in the Maldives. It wasn't just a fairy tale for me either. I want you to know that. Whatever happens with us, that day was real. His smile lit up the hallway. Good night, my mermaid. Good night, my sailor, she replied, closing the door between them. Sleep eluded Rose as she replayed the evening. She'd gone from viewing Mark as the enemy to seeing him as an ally in the space of a week. But could she trust this transformation? Men promised change all the time when they wanted something. What would happen when the novelty wore off, when environmental initiatives ate into profits, when his board revolted? She thought about calling her best friend, Lisa, but how could she explain? Hey, remember that guy I told you about from 3 years ago? Turns out he's my arranged husband, and also potentially the key to revolutionizing ocean conservation. Also, I want to climb him like a tree, but I'm trying to be professional. No, some things were too complicated for phone calls. Meanwhile, Mark stood on his bedroom balcony, letting the ocean breeze cool his overheated skin. He'd been prepared to endure a loveless marriage for the sake of the company. Instead, fate had delivered his dream girl with a bitter twist. She was everything he wanted, but had every reason to hate what he represented. Her passion at the gala had been intoxicating. Watching her educate eviscerate Harrison had been better than any aphrodisiac, But he understood her caution. He'd have to prove himself through actions, not words. Tomorrow, he'd start by giving her unprecedented access to company operations and decision-making power. His board would have collective aneurysms, but they'd adapt or be replaced. The next morning brought their first real test as a professional couple. The Port Authority meeting was about expanding Kalis operations in the Caribbean, a move that would triple their regional capacity, but potentially impact several protected marine areas. Rose arrived at the conference room to find Mark already there, surrounded by executives she recognized from her research, the very people whose companies she'd lambasted in academic papers. "Gentlemen," Mark said, standing as she entered, "my wife, Dr. Rose Callis, will be consulting on all environmental aspects of the expansion." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "With respect, Thomas Anderson, the Port Authority Director," said carefully, "Dr. Evelyn, excuse me, Dr. Callis, has been quite vocal in her opposition to commercial shipping." Rose took her seat beside Mark, feeling the hostility like a physical weight. "I've been vocal about irresponsible shipping," she corrected calmly. "There's a significant difference. Gentlemen, I'm here because my husband believes business and environmental protection can coexist profitably. I'm willing to prove that theory, but only if you're willing to listen." Mark's hand found hers under the table, a silent show of support. "She has full authority to veto any proposal that doesn't meet environmental standards," he added. "My wife's approval is mandatory for this expansion." The explosion was immediate. "You can't be serious. This is a multi-billion-dollar expansion." "We don't answer to academics." Mark weathered the storm calmly, his hand steady on Rose's. When the shouting died down, he spoke with quiet authority. "Callis Shipping is my company. I decide whose approval matters. Anyone uncomfortable with that is welcome to pursue partnerships elsewhere." The threat hung in the air. Callis was the largest shipper in the hemisphere. Without them, the port expansion would fail. "Perhaps," Anderson said through gritted teeth, "Dr. Callis could share her specific concerns." Rose pulled out her tablet, projecting images onto the conference room screen. "Your proposed route cuts directly through 3 nursery areas for endangered species. The construction timeline coincides with peak migration season for at least 12 protected species. The dredging depth you're proposing would destroy coral formations that are centuries old." She clicked through slide after slide of devastating data. "However," she continued, noting their darkening expressions, "with some modifications, we can minimize impact while still achieving your capacity goals. Would you like to see my alternatives?" The next 2 hours were a battle of wills, data, and barely concealed antagonism. Rose fought for every reef, every migration path, every breeding ground. The port executives pushed back on costs, timelines, and logistics. Mark mediated when tensions peaked, but largely let Rose lead the charge. By the end, they'd reached a compromise that protected 60% of the sensitive areas while still allowing significant expansion. It wasn't perfect. Rose had wanted to save more. But it was better than the environmental catastrophe originally planned. "That was brutal," Rose said as they left the building. She felt wrung out, exhausted from fighting men who saw her as an impediment to profit. Mark guided her to his car, opening her door with old-fashioned courtesy. "You were brilliant," he countered. "Anderson's never compromised on anything in his life. You got him to redirect an entire shipping lane." Rose slumped in her seat. "I wanted to save the Western Reef Complex, too. Those brain corals are irreplaceable. We'll work on it," Mark promised. "This was just round 1. You've got them thinking now. considering impacts they've ignored for decades. That's huge. Rose back at the office. Word of the meeting had already spread. Mark's executive team was waiting in his office, faces ranging from curious to mutinous. You gave her veto power? His COO, David Sterling, demanded. Have you completely lost your mind? Mark settled behind his desk, the picture of calm. I've given my wife, who happens to be a leading marine biologist, authority over environmental decisions, unless you're suggesting we continue destroying the oceans that our business depends on. She's been our enemy for years, David protested. Her papers have cost us millions in regulatory compliance. Good, Mark said simply. Those regulations forced us to innovate. We're more efficient now than we were 5 years ago. Rose isn't the enemy, David. Short-sighted profiteering is. He looked around the room at men he'd worked with for years. Things are changing. We can lead that change or be buried by it. I choose to lead, with my wife's expertise guiding us. Anyone who can't accept that should submit their resignation by end of day. The silence was deafening. Finally, his head of operations spoke up. What exactly are you proposing? Mark smiled. A complete environmental audit of all operations. Rose will lead a team to identify problems and solutions. We're going to become the most environmentally responsible shipping company in the world. The board will never approve the costs, someone muttered. The board will approve it, Mark said confidently, because Rose will show them how environmental responsibility translates to long-term profitability. Fewer fines, better public relations, first-mover advantage on inevitable regulations. We're not going green for altruism, though that's a nice bonus. We're doing it because it's smart business. He paused, letting that sink in. Rose will present her initial findings at next week's board meeting. I suggest you all prepare your departments for scrutiny. The executives filed out, murmuring amongst themselves. David lingered, his expression thoughtful. She really got to you, didn't she? He said. This isn't just about the marriage arrangement. Mark considered his words carefully. David, have you ever met someone who made you question everything you thought you knew? Who made you want to be better than you are? David's expression softened slightly. Once. Long time ago. Then you understand, Mark said. Rose isn't just my wife. She's my chance to build something that matters. I can continue my father's legacy of profit at any cost, or I can create something new. I know which I choose. Rose spent the afternoon at the Marine Research Facility, trying to focus on her own work, while her mind replayed the morning's meeting. Her colleagues peppered her with questions about her sudden marriage to their collective nemesis. It's complicated, she said for the 100th time. Dr. Lisa Chen, her research partner and best friend, cornered her in the lab. Complicated? Rose, you married the man whose company you've spent 5 years fighting. You're going to need a better explanation than complicated. Rose sighed, pulling off her gloves. Remember the guy from the Maldives? Lisa's eyes widened. No. Mark Callis is your mystery diver? Small world, right? I don't even know what that is, Lisa said, sinking onto a lab stool. Fate? Cosmic joke? Divine intervention? All of the above, Rose suggested weakly. Lisa, I don't know what I'm doing. This morning, I sat in a room full of men who hate me and tried to save marine habitats while they counted profits. My husband backed me up. But for how long? What happens when I cost him serious money? What happens when the fairy tale reunion wears off and he realizes he's married to the woman trying to dismantle his industry? Lisa studied her friend carefully. What happens if he's serious about changing? Rose, do you have any idea what you could accomplish with Callis' resources behind you? The question haunted Rose through the rest of her day. As she analyzed water samples and updated research databases, she imagined having a fleet at her disposal for ocean cleanup. Ships equipped with proper waste management systems. routes designed around migration patterns instead of through them. It was a seductive vision, but it required trusting Mark completely. That evening, she arrived home to find him cooking dinner, sleeves rolled up, and a look of intense concentration on his face, as he stirred something on the stove. "You cook?" she asked, surprised. "I'm trying," he admitted. It seemed like I should contribute something besides take-out menus. The domesticity of the scene made her heart ache. This was what she'd imagined during those long nights after the Maldives. Coming home to Marcus, sharing simple moments, building a life together. But Marcus, the charming diver, and Mark, the shipping magnate, were still difficult to reconcile. "What are you making?" she asked, peering into the pot. "A tempting seafood risotto. The irony isn't lost on me. Cooking ocean creatures for my ocean conservationist wife." His self-deprecating humor made her smile. "We're not all vegetarians. Sustainable fishing is actually good for ocean economies." She paused. "Is this sustainable seafood?" Mark pointed to the packaging on the counter, clearly labeled with sustainability certifications. "I'm learning," he said simply. "Slowly. But I'm trying." They worked together to finish dinner, moving around each other with surprising ease. Rose made a salad, while Mark plated the risotto, and they carried everything to the dining table that overlooked the bay. "How was your afternoon?" Mark asked as they ate. "Interesting," Rose said carefully. "My colleagues think I've either lost my mind or pulled off the con of the century." Mark's expression darkened. "They think you married me for my money." "No, they think I married you to destroy you from the inside. Like some sort of environmental sleeper agent." "Are you?" Mark asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. Rose considered the question. "Originally, maybe a little. I thought I could minimize damage, maybe influence some decisions. But now—" She met his gaze. "Now I think maybe we could actually build something together. You gave me veto power today, Mark. Do you know how unprecedented that is?" "You needed teeth to be taken seriously," he said. "Otherwise you'd just be the CEO's trophy wife with opinions. This way, they have to respect your expertise." The thoughtfulness of the gesture made her chest tight. "Thank you for understanding, for fighting for me." After dinner, they sat on the balcony with wine, watching boats navigate the bay. "Tell me about your father," Rose said suddenly. "You mentioned him arranging this marriage as punishment." Mark's expression shuttered slightly. Marcus Callis Sr. was complicated. Brilliant businessman, terrible father. He built the company from nothing, sacrificed everything for it, including his family. Mark took a long sip of wine. He wanted me to be his clone. Ruthless, profit-driven, unencumbered by conscience. When I started implementing environmental protocols after the Maldives, he was furious. Said I was going soft, destroying his legacy. So he arranged a marriage to someone he thought would reinforce traditional values, Rose guessed. Mark laughed bitterly. He knew about the Evelyn ports, knew your father needed the merger. I don't think he researched you beyond your family name. If he had, he'd have realized he was handing me exactly what I wanted. A partner who could help me be better than him. Rose reached over to take his hand. I'm sorry. About your father. It's hard when parents see children as extensions of themselves rather than individuals. Your parents? Mark prompted gently. My mother died when I was 12. Dad remarried quickly, for business reasons, of course. My stepmother tolerates me as long as I don't interfere with her plans. This marriage was the first time my father and I agreed on anything in years, and that was only because he was desperate. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, as the sky darkened. Finally, Rose spoke again. I need to see your operations. Not the sanitized executive tour. The real thing. Ships, ports, warehouses. I can't make informed recommendations without understanding how everything actually works. Mark squeezed her hand. Done. We'll start tomorrow with the Port of Miami. Wear something you don't mind getting dirty. Rose smiled. I spend half my life in wetsuits covered in algae. I think I can handle a port tour. This is different, Mark warned. You're going to see things that appall you. Things I'm not proud of. Are you prepared for that? Rose turned to face him fully. I've seen your worst on paper. Now I need to see it in person so we can fix it together. Can you handle me witnessing your operation's dark side? Mark lifted their joined hands to his lips. I'm counting on it. You can't fix what you won't acknowledge. Just try to remember I inherited most of these problems. Judge me on what I do next, not what's been done before. It was a fair request, and Rose nodded. I'll try. But Mark, some of what I see might make me angry. That anger isn't at you. It's at the system. Don't take it personally if I need space to process. Understood, Mark said. Now, can I interest you in a movie? Something with absolutely no environmental themes whatsoever. They ended up watching an old romantic comedy, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, but somehow migrating toward the middle as the movie progressed. When Rose dozed off against Mark's shoulder, he carefully covered her with a blanket and let her sleep. She looked younger in sleep, without the weight of saving the world on her shoulders. He thought about carrying her to bed, her actual bed, but didn't want to presume. Instead, he simply held her, watching the lights on the water and marveling at the strange turns life could take. His father's punishment had become his salvation, delivered in the form of a brilliant woman who challenged everything he thought he knew. Rose woke sometime after midnight, disoriented to find herself curled against Mark's chest. Sorry, she mumbled, starting to pull away. Don't, he said softly. This is nice. Unless you're uncomfortable, she should have been. They'd agreed to take things slow, to build trust before intimacy. But lying here with his heartbeat under her ear felt like coming home. 5 more minutes, she negotiated. Mark chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. I'll take whatever minutes you're willing to give. They stayed there until the sky began to lighten, not speaking, just existing in the same space without walls or agendas between them. The port of Miami at dawn was a symphony of industrial chaos. Cranes moved like mechanical dinosaurs, containers stacked like multicolored building blocks, and the cacophony of engines, horns, and shouting voices created a soundtrack of commerce. Rose stood at the entrance, wearing borrowed steel-toed boots and a hard hat, watching her husband transform from the polished CEO into someone who clearly knew his way around a working port. Mark guided her through the security checkpoint, his hand protective on her back as forklifts whizzed past. Stay close, he instructed. It's dangerous if you don't know the patterns. Their first stop was the Calais shipping section, where 3 massive vessels were being loaded. Rose's trained eye immediately spotted problems. Oil sheens on the water, inefficient loading patterns that would require more fuel to balance, workers without proper safety equipment. She pulled out her tablet, starting what would become an extensive list. Mark watched her work, not interrupting when her expression grew increasingly grim. That one, she pointed to a container ship, is leaking something. See the discoloration in the water? Mark signaled to the port supervisor, who came jogging over. Sir, container ship Reliance has a leak. Stop loading immediately and get an environmental team here. The supervisor looked confused. It's just a little hydraulic fluid, sir. Happens all the time. Rose's expression could have frozen the harbor. A little hydraulic fluid, she repeated. Tell me, Mr. Patterson, the man supplied nervously. Mr. Patterson, do you know what hydraulic fluid does to marine life? No, ma'am. It creates a film that prevents oxygen exchange, Fish suffocate. Seabirds die when it coats their feathers. That little leak is a criminal violation of the Clean Water Act." She turned to Mark. "This is standard." Mark's jaw tightened. "Apparently. Patterson, clean it up. Now. And I want a report on every leak, spill, or minor incident in the past year. On my desk. By tomorrow." As Patterson scurried off, Mark touched Rose's arm. "I'm sorry. I knew it was bad, but seeing it through your eyes." "This is just the beginning," Rose said quietly. "But at least you're willing to see it. That's more than most." They continued the tour, Rose documenting everything from improper waste disposal to the devastating noise levels that would carry underwater for miles. By noon, she'd filled 30 pages with violations, inefficiencies, and recommendations. Lunch was subdued, eaten in Mark's port office overlooking the organized chaos below. "I feel like I should apologize," he said, watching Rose review her notes. "I've been CEO for 5 years. These problems are mine to own." Rose looked up from her tablet. "Are you going to fix them?" "Yes." "Then stop apologizing and start planning. I have a priority list. Some things need immediate attention, like that leak. Others can be phased in. But Mark, this is going to cost millions." He nodded. "I know. But the alternative is eventually costing us everything. Environmental regulations are only getting stricter. We can get ahead of them, or be buried by fines." James arrived as they were finishing lunch, looking harried. "The board heard about this morning's shutdown. They're not happy." Mark's expression hardened. "They'll be less happy when they see the liability report Rose is preparing." "How many violations, honey?" The endearment slipped out naturally, making Rose's cheeks warm. 47 that I've documented so far. Just at this port." James whistled low. "The fines alone could bankrupt us if the EPA does a surprise inspection." Rose finished. "You've been lucky so far. That luck won't hold forever." James studied her with new respect. "What do you recommend?" Rose pulled up her preliminary action plan. "Immediate cessation of all practices that violate federal law. Retrofit the fleet with cleaner engines. Yes, it's expensive. But there are tax incentives. Implement proper waste management systems. Retrain staff on environmental protocols. Create an internal compliance department that actually has teeth." She paused. "And you need to prepare for whistleblowers. Once we start making changes, someone will report the past violations. Better to self-report and cooperate than be caught hiding them." Mark and James exchanged looks. "She's right," Mark said. "Dad always said environmental laws were suggestions. Time to pay for that attitude." The afternoon brought a tour of the warehouses, where Rose found more problems: improper chemical storage, lack of spill containment systems, and workers routinely ignoring safety protocols. She interviewed staff, finding most were unaware of environmental regulations or had been told to ignore them for efficiency. "They're not bad people," she told Mark, as they watched a forklift driver narrowly miss puncturing a drum of hazardous material. "They're following the culture set from above. Change the culture, you change the behavior." Mark nodded, making his own notes. "We'll need comprehensive retraining. Maybe partner with a local community college for certification programs." By the time they left the port, Rose was exhausted but energized. She'd expected to find problems, but the scope was both appalling and exciting. This was a chance to create real change, not just write papers that industry ignored. Mark drove them home in thoughtful silence, finally speaking as they neared the penthouse. "You could have destroyed me with what you saw today. One call to the EPA and careless shipping would be finished." Rose turned to him. "What would that accomplish?" "Another company would take your place, probably one that cares even less." I don't want to destroy you, Mark. I want to transform you. That evening, they worked side by side in the living room, Mark on his laptop arranging emergency management meetings, while Rose compiled her findings into a comprehensive report. Occasionally, they'd share discoveries. Mark finding a supplier of eco-friendly shipping materials, Rose identifying a grant program for green technology adoption. The domesticity of it, the partnership, felt natural in a way Rose hadn't expected. When she yawned for the third time, Mark closed his laptop. "Bed," he ordered gently. "The ocean will still need saving tomorrow." Rose stretched, her back popping from hours of hunching over her tablet. "One more section." "No," Mark said firmly, pulling her to her feet. "You've documented enough violations to keep us busy for months. Rest now." She let him guide her down the hall, pausing at her door. "Thank you for today. For letting me see the truth. For not making excuses." Mark tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly tender. "Thank you for not running away when you saw how bad it was. Another woman might have fled back to her research lab." "I'm not another woman," Rose said softly. "No," Mark agreed. "You're extraordinary, and you're going to help me build something extraordinary too." The moment stretched between them, full of possibility. Finally, Rose stood on her toes to kiss his cheek. "Good night, Mark. Good night, my brilliant wife." Rose changed for bed, her mind still racing with plans and possibilities. She pulled out her personal journal, needing to process the day. "Day 8 of marriage," she wrote. "Saw the belly of the beast today. It's worse than my research suggested, but somehow that makes me more determined." Mark didn't make excuses or try to minimize the problems. He faced them head-on, which gives me hope. Maybe this arranged marriage is actually an arranged miracle. Time will tell if his commitment to change survives the first quarterly profit report. She paused, pen hovering over paper, then added, "I'm falling for him again. Or still, I need to be careful. The mission has to come first. But when he looks at me like I'm the answer to everything, I want to be. God help me. I want to be his answer as much as I want to save the oceans." The board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday, giving Rose 3 days to prepare a presentation that would either revolutionize callous shipping or get her husband ousted as CEO. She spent the weekend at the Marine Research Facility, cross-referencing her port observations with published studies and regulatory requirements. Lisa helped, excited by the possibility of industry cooperation. "If you pull this off," Lisa said, highlighting another violation, "you'll have done more for ocean conservation than 20 years of academic papers." Rose nodded absently, adding another slide to her presentation. "If I don't pull it off, I'll have ruined my husband's company and my father's port business. No pressure." Mark, meanwhile, spent the weekend in damage control mode. Several board members had called, concerned about rumors of environmental audits and operational shutdowns. He handled each call with calm authority, promising full explanations at the Tuesday meeting. When particularly aggressive board members threatened immediate action, he reminded them of his controlling interest, barely maintained but still decisive. His father had structured the company to keep power concentrated, never imagining his son would use that power for environmental reform. "You're playing with fire," David warned during a strategy session. "Harrison and his faction are already grumbling about finding ways to dilute your control." Mark smiled grimly. "Let them try. I've got something they don't, a secret weapon named Dr. Rose Callas." Sunday evening found Mark and Rose having dinner with her family, a command performance at the Evelyn estate that neither had been able to avoid. Rose's stepmother, Victoria, had decorated the dining room like a throne room, clearly intending to impress or intimidate. Rose's father, Richard, looked older than his 60 years, the stress of hidden debts etching lines on his face. "So," Victoria said over the soup course, How is married life treating you both? Her tone suggested she expected complaints. Wonderfully, Mark answered smoothly, reaching over to squeeze Rose's hand. Your stepdaughter is even more brilliant than advertised. Victoria's smile was sharp. Yes, Rose was always academically inclined. Such a shame she wasted it on fish. Marine biology, Rose corrected mildly. And hardly wasted, considering I'm now directing environmental compliance for one of the world's largest shipping companies. That was stretching her role a bit. But the shock on Victoria's face was worth it. Richard leaned forward, interested. You're working with Kayla Shipping now? We're implementing comprehensive environmental reforms, Mark explained. Rose is leading the initiative. It's going to position us ahead of regulatory changes and appeal to increasingly eco-conscious consumers. Rose watched her father process this, seeing the businessman in him war with the traditionalist. Expensive, he finally said. So is destroying the planet, Rose replied. But yes, initial costs are significant. Long-term savings, however, both financial and ecological, far outweigh them. The rest of dinner was a delicate dance of Victoria's barbed comments and Mark's deflections. He defended Rose at every turn, praising her intelligence, her dedication, her vision. It was the first time anyone had championed her in this house, and Rose found herself blinking back unexpected tears. After dessert, Richard asked Mark to join him in his study, leaving Rose alone with Victoria. Don't get too comfortable, her stepmother warned the moment the men left. Men, like Mark Callis, don't stay satisfied with idealistic wives. When he gets tired of your little environmental project, he'll find someone more suitable. Rose smiled sweetly. You mean someone like you? Trophy wife who brings nothing but decoration. I'll take my chances. In the study, Richard poured 2 whiskeys and studied his new son-in-law. You actually care about her, he said, sounding surprised. I assumed this was purely business. Mark accepted the drink. It started as business. Your daughter complicated things by being extraordinary. Richard sighed heavily. She gets that from her mother. Brilliant, passionate, impossible to control. I've never known what to do with her. Maybe that's the problem, Mark suggested carefully. You tried to do something with her, instead of letting her be who she is. Richard's eyes narrowed. You think you know my daughter after a week? I think I see her, Mark corrected. Which might be more than you've managed in 28 years. The drive home was quiet until Rose suddenly said, Thank you for tonight. For defending me. Mark glanced at her, noting the tension in her shoulders. Victoria's a piece of work. How long has she been making you feel small? 16 years, give or take. She wanted a daughter who'd marry well and host tea parties. Instead, she got me. Rose's laugh was bitter. My father just wanted me to be useful to his business. Neither of them ever saw me as a person with my own dreams. Mark reached over to take her hand. Their loss, my gain. Rose, you're going to show them all what you're capable of. Starting Tuesday. Rose squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his confidence. What if the board hates my proposal? What if I cost you everything? Then we'll build something new, Mark said simply. I told you, I inherited my father's company, but I don't have to perpetuate his values. If the board can't see the future, we'll find investors who can. Either way, we're doing this together. The certainty in his voice made Rose's heart race. You really mean that, every word? Rose, I've spent 3 years looking for you. Now that I've found you again, do you really think a bunch of stubborn board members could make me let you go? The weight of his commitment settled over her like a warm blanket. This was real. Whatever happened Tuesday, they would face it together. Monday was a flurry of last-minute preparations. Rose refined her presentation, while Mark worked his network, quietly securing support from younger board members. who understood the changing business landscape. They met for lunch in his office, sharing Chinese takeout while reviewing strategy. Harrison will attack the costs first, Mark predicted, stealing a dumpling from Rose's container. Then question your credentials. He's old school. Doesn't believe women belong in business, Rose snorted. Let him try. I've faced down worse than a pompous board member. She paused, chopsticks halfway to her mouth. Mark, what if I go too hard? I can be intense when I'm passionate about something. I'm counting on it, Mark assured her. They need to see your fire. Half these men have been sleepwalking through board meetings for years. Wake them up, Rose. Show them what's at stake. His faith in her was intoxicating. Rose set down her food and moved around the desk to kiss him soundly. What was that for? Mark asked, looking dazed. Believing in me, Rose said simply. Not many people have. Mark pulled her onto his lap, holding her close. Get used to it. I plan to spend the next 50 years or so believing in you. The promise hung between them, heavy with implication. 50 years. A lifetime. Together. They were interrupted by James knocking on the door. Sorry to interrupt, he said, though his grin suggested otherwise. Final board packet is ready for review. Rose scrambled off Mark's lap, blushing furiously. James pretended not to notice, spreading documents across the desk. I've included Rose's environmental assessment, the cost projections, and the legal liability analysis. Fair warning. Harrison's already seen it, and he's loading for bear. James arrived as they were finishing lunch, looking harried. The board heard about this morning's shutdown. They're not happy. Mark's expression hardened. Let him come. Rose has science and law on her side. What's he got besides bluster? 40 years of doing things the old way, James said. Don't underestimate the power of institutional inertia. The presentation consumed the rest of Monday. Rose practiced in front of Mark and James, refining her arguments and anticipating objections. By evening, she was exhausted, but confident. Mark ordered dinner from her favorite restaurant, and they ate on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. Whatever happens tomorrow, Rose said, this week has been worth it. Seeing your operations, understanding the scope of possible change, even if they reject everything. At least we tried. Mark set down his wineglass and turned to face her fully. They won't reject it. You're too compelling, your argument's too sound. But Rose, even if they did, I need you to know something. He took her hands in his expression serious. This isn't just about the company anymore. When I stood at that altar and saw you under the veil, my whole world shifted. Every day since has only confirmed what I knew in that moment. You're my future. The company, the board, the business. It's all secondary to building a life with you. I know we agreed to take things slow, but I'm falling in love with you. Again. Or maybe I never stopped after the Maldives Rose's breath caught. The sunset, the wine, his declaration, it was almost too much. Mark, you don't have to say it back, he rushed to add. I know it's only been a week, but facing tomorrow, facing a board that might revolt, I needed you to know where I stand. You're not just saving my company, Rose. You're saving me. Rose stood, pulling him to his feet. Come with me, she said quietly. She led him inside, down the hall to her room, the guest room she'd insisted on taking. At the doorway, she turned to face him. I've been hiding in here, protecting myself, keeping walls between us because I was scared of how much I already felt. She took a deep breath. But you've torn down every defense I have. You see me, Mark. The real me. And somehow you think I'm worth revolutionizing your entire world for. You are, he said fervently. Rose, you're worth. She silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her feelings into it. When they parted, both breathless, she whispered, "Stay with me tonight. Not for that. Just stay. I don't want any more wars between us." They lay together in the guest bed that had seemed so lonely all week, fully clothed but intimately entwined. Mark held her like she was precious, his arms a sanctuary from tomorrow's uncertainties. "Tell me about the future," Rose said into the darkness. "After we save the oceans and revolutionize shipping. What comes next?" Mark pressed a kiss to her hair. "Children who inherit a better world. Vacations to the Maldives where we can dive those reefs we're protecting. Growing old on a porch somewhere, arguing about whose turn it is to save the world that day." Rose smiled against his chest. "That sounds perfect." Yeah. "Though I want a beach house, not just a porch." "Deal," Mark agreed readily. "Anything else?" "Unlimited funding for marine research." "Obviously. And you have to learn to scuba dive properly. No more recreational cowboy nonsense." Mark laughed. Harsh but fair. They talked until nearly dawn, planning a future that felt both impossible and inevitable. When Rose finally drifted off, Mark stayed awake, marveling at the woman in his arms. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but with Rose beside him, he felt ready for anything. His father had arranged this marriage as a cage, but it had become wings. Rose stirred, murmuring something about sustainable seaweed farming, and Mark smiled. Only his wife would dream about environmental solutions. He closed his eyes, letting her dreams of a better world carry him toward sleep. Tomorrow they'd face the board. Tonight they had each other. It was more than enough. Tuesday dawned clear and bright, as if the universe was offering encouragement. Rose dressed carefully in her most professional suit, navy blue to bring out her eyes, Mark had said when he saw it. He wore his lucky cufflinks, the ones shaped like ships that his grandfather had worn building the company from nothing. They ate breakfast quietly, both focused on the battle ahead. "Remember," Mark said as they prepared to leave, "you're not asking permission. You're telling them what's going to happen. This is my company, and I've made my decision. They can get on board or get out." Rose nodded, squaring her shoulders. "Right. I'm not the idealistic academic begging for scraps. I'm Dr. Rose Callis, and I'm here to save their asses from regulatory destruction." The Callis Shipping boardroom occupied the entire top floor of their Miami headquarters, with views that stretched to the horizon. 12 board members sat around the massive table like judges at a tribunal, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Harrison Clark, Mark's primary antagonist, had positioned himself directly opposite where Rose would present, his body language screaming disapproval before she'd even begun. Mark took his place at the head of the table, with Rose to his right. "Gentlemen," he began, then nodded to the 2 female board members, "and ladies, we're here to discuss the future of Callis Shipping. Dr. Rose Callis has completed a comprehensive environmental audit of our operations. What she's found will shock you. What she proposes will save us." "Save us," Harrison scoffed immediately. "From what? We've operated successfully for 50 years without environmental crusaders interfering." Rose stood, remote in hand, and the first slide appeared on the wall-mounted screen. It showed a staggering number, $847 million. "From this," she said calmly, "that's our estimated liability for environmental violations at just 3 ports. Would you like to see the full exposure?" The room fell silent. Rose clicked to the next slide, showing photographs from her port visit. Illegal chemical storage, improper waste disposal, chronic oil leaks, Each image represents not just an environmental crime, but a financial time bomb. The EPA has increased enforcement by 300% in the last 2 years. We're not talking about if we get caught, but when. For the next hour, Rose systematically destroyed any illusion of security the board might have harbored. She showed them competitor companies that had been crippled by environmental fines. She presented new regulations coming into effect within 18 months that would make their current operations illegal. She demonstrated how their insurance would refuse to cover environmental damages, leaving personal assets exposed. By the time she reached the solutions section, even Harrison looked shaken. The good news, Rose continued, switching to slides showing green technology, is that we can turn this liability into an advantage. Early adoption of environmental standards positions us as industry leaders. We can charge premium rates for eco-conscious shipping. We qualify for massive tax incentives. And we future-proof against regulations that will bankrupt our competitors. How much? Asked Sandra Williams, the board's most pragmatic member. Rose clicked to the cost slide. Initial investment of $200 million over 2 years. Projected savings of $400 million in avoided fines and increased efficiency over 5 years. That doesn't include new revenue streams from environmentally conscious clients. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. Or we can continue as is and hope the government doesn't notice nearly $1 billion in violations. This is alarmist nonsense, Harrison blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. One surprise inspection away from bankruptcy isn't alarmist, Rose countered. It's reality. Mr. Clark, you've been on this board for how long? 20 years? In that time, how many environmental regulations have been rolled back versus strengthened? Harrison's silence was answer enough. David Sterling raised his hand. Dr. Callis, your credentials are impressive, but you've been married to Mark for what? A week. How do we know this isn't just pillow talk activism? Rose's smile could have cut glass. Mr. Sterling, I've published 43 peer-reviewed papers on marine transportation impacts. I've testified before Congress twice on shipping regulations. I've been fighting companies like Callis for 8 years. Do you really think 1 week of marriage would convert me from activism to corruption? If anything, marriage has made me more determined to fix these problems, because now they're my problems, too. Mark watched with pride as Rose fielded every question, challenged every assumption, and gradually won over the room. Even Harrison's objections grew weaker as she presented solution after solution. When she showed how Rotterdam's Green Port Initiative had increased property values and attracted major corporate headquarters, several board members started taking notes. The presentation concluded with a simple image, a healthy ocean with careless ships moving through it, overlaid with the words profit and preservation. The future of shipping. Questions? Rose asked, returning to her seat. The room erupted in discussion. After 2 hours of debate, Mark called for a vote. All in favor of implementing Dr. Callis's environmental action plan. 8 hands rose immediately. 2 more followed slowly. Harrison and 1 ally held out, but it didn't matter. The measure passed. Rose felt her knees go weak with relief. She'd done it. They'd done it. Mark's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. Implementation begins immediately, Mark announced. Rose will have full authority to hire her team and access whatever resources she needs. I expect complete cooperation from all departments. The meeting adjourned with shell-shocked board members filing out, murmuring amongst themselves. Harrison paused at Rose's chair. You're very clever, Dr. Callis, but clever doesn't equal profitable. When this idealistic experiment fails, I'll be waiting. Rose stood to face him. Mr. Clark, you've spent 20 years profiting from environmental destruction. I'm offering you a chance to profit from environmental restoration. That's not idealism. It's evolution. Adapt or become extinct. Harrison left without another word, but Sandra Williams approached with a smile. That was masterful. I think you might have actually saved this company. She lowered her voice. And possibly your husband. There were rumblings about a leadership challenge if the environmental liabilities became public. You've given us a path forward. Alone in the boardroom, Mark pulled Rose into his arms. You were incredible. Absolutely incredible. Did you see Harrison's face when you showed the liability numbers? Rose laughed, adrenaline still coursing through her. I thought he might have a heart attack. Was I too harsh? You were perfect, Mark assured her. Rose, you just got a board of stubborn millionaires to vote for environmental reform. You're a miracle worker. He kissed her soundly, pouring all his pride and admiration into it. Lunch? He asked when they parted. Champagne? The ocean, Rose said impulsively. I want to see the ocean. I just convinced 12 people to help me save it. I need to remember why. They drove to Key Biscayne, finding a quiet stretch of beach away from tourists. Rose kicked off her heels and walked to the water's edge, letting the waves lap at her feet. Mark joined her, suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up. This is what we're protecting, Rose said quietly. Not just water and fish, but this, the piece of it, the possibility. Mark wrapped his arms around her from behind. We're going to do it, he promised. Every change you proposed, every innovation you imagined. We'll make it happen. Rose leaned back against him. Together. Always together, Mark confirmed. Partners in everything. They stood there as the sun climbed higher. Two people who'd found each other against impossible odds. Now united in purpose as well as love. The next months passed in a whirlwind of transformation. Rose assembled a team of environmental experts, many poached from advocacy groups that had spent years fighting callous shipping. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but Rose's vision and Mark's resources proved irresistible. Within 6 weeks, they'd implemented new waste management protocols across all domestic ports. By month 3, the first retrofitted vessels were operating with 40% less emissions. The financial press took notice, with headlines ranging from skeptical Kayla's shipping's green gamble to admiring the environmental executive, how love changed a corporate culture. Mark and Rose's relationship deepened alongside their professional partnership. The guest room became a home office, as Rose permanently relocated to their shared bedroom. They developed routines that balanced their intense work with moments of connection. Morning swims in the building's rooftop pool, evening walks along the bay, weekend diving trips to monitor reef health near shipping lanes. The Maldives' magic hadn't faded. It had evolved into something stronger. They were building a life, together, brick by brick, innovation by innovation. The first real test came when quarterly earnings showed a 15% drop in profits due to implementation costs. Harrison led a minority revolt, calling an emergency board meeting. I told you this would happen, he crowed, waving the financial reports. We're bleeding money for the sake of fish. But Mark was ready with Rose's projections showing long-term gains and new contracts from environmentally conscious companies. Amazon had just signed an exclusive shipping deal worth $100 million annually, specifically citing Callas's green initiatives. The revolt fizzled, and Harrison's influence waned. 2 months later, he quietly sold his shares and retired. Rose's brother Michael graduated from college that spring, and she convinced Mark to hire him for their new sustainability consulting division. We're creating a brain trust, she explained. People who understand both business and environment. Michael's dual degree in business and environmental science makes him perfect. Watching Rose with her family, Mark saw new dimensions of her personality. She was fiercely protective of her siblings, having essentially raised them after their mother's death. It made him love her more, seeing her capacity for caretaking extend beyond ocean life to human life. Their first wedding anniversary approached with Rose deep in negotiations with the International Maritime Organization about new global standards. She'd become a recognized voice in shipping reform, equally comfortable in boardrooms and research vessels. Mark surprised her with a week-long return to the Maldives, to the exact resort where they'd first met. "We need to see if those reefs we talked about are still there," he said, presenting her with the tickets. Rose kissed him senseless. "Have I told you lately that you're wonderful?" "Not since breakfast," Mark teased. "Clearly I need to step up my game." The Maldives felt like coming full circle. They dove the same reefs, finding them healthier, thanks to new protections Rose had helped implement. They walked the same beaches, ate at the same restaurant where they'd shared their first meal. But everything was different too. Then they'd been strangers playing at romance. Now they were partners in every sense. "I love you," Rose said over. And that's the end of today's story. Now I want to hear from you. What lesson did this story leave with you? Drop your answer below. I can't wait to read them all. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our weekly stories. Until next time, stay blessed.